Okay, so today I'm experimenting with yet another type of alcohol stove. This one is made from an aerosol spray can. Specifically, it is made from an exhausted can of gunk brake parts cleaner. This stove basically has similar specs to the can stove I made a few videos ago. I used the same technique as I used in the Miller Lite can stove to cut this stove, except I actually, instead of using a razor blade, I used a hacksaw blade clamped down to the same blocks. It took a little bit longer to cut through this thick of metal, but it did work. All I did was pop the top of this off. If I pull this off now, you can see. And what I did was, on the inside of the slip here, I took a drill bit and I drilled several small holes on the inside, and then I used my razor knife to basically bust the gaps, and that allowed me to remove the center. At that point, I took one of my blocks off. Let me give a squirt of this to put that cap back on. At that point, I then used my hacksaw blade and measured down to where it was just crowning at this crease right here. Basically where the blue line is. And I came all the way around with the hacksaw blade, cut that off, and I discarded the middle piece because it's not needed. What we end up with is two pieces. You can see the inside piece is tucked upside down into the base. And I secured this with a bead of JB Weld. What I basically did with the JB Weld was I put a bead of it around this lip, and when I inserted it inside of the base, turn the base over, put a piece of 2x4 or other wood on top of it with your hammer, pound it in so it gets flush. Now, if you mismeasured or misjudged the depth of the can, as I did when I made this, the easiest way I found to countersink this into the bottom of the can is to use two hammers. I used a ball peen and a claw hammer. Place the flatter, wider end of the ball peen hammer down inside the can, and then just give it a few taps. And when you're doing that, rotate the hammer like this so you get it all the way around. And that allowed me to seat the can lid, top, completely down inside the base. And I took my Dremel tool. Before I did that, I should have mentioned this. I took my Dremel tool and I cut 3 notches in this chrome lip. 1, 2, 3. I cut the notches from the top of the chrome all the way down until they just nicked the start of the white piece here. And that, of course, allows the fuel to flow from inside the canister to the base into the pocket down here, the channel. And then, as always, from what I've researched, more holes is more efficient, from what I've been told. I drilled 32 holes, 1/16 inch, all around the base. Now, a tricky part on this kind of design is you can see how this tapers. Okay? So what you have to kind of do is you have to judge when you put, or you can measure if you want to get technical. I judge. When you put this inside, it's going to come down and taper in. When you put your holes in here, you don't want to put your holes above where it tapers. because it'll drill through the inside wall. That's no good. So you got to kind of line it up on the outside first, figure out where the taper is going to start to come in, put your line around, put your holes in. If you look at this closely, and I'm sure you've seen it by now a couple times, the inside is charred, kind of blackish. You can see it pretty good there. I didn't clean this can out before I burned it for the first time, so I'm going to blame that on residue of the brake cleaner still being in the can. This is a pretty neat design. It's definitely a lot sturdier. Should be able to hold more weight. It is heavier. I don't have a scale to measure it, but it is a little bit heavier than the traditional can stove. One thing I did notice with this design of stove is it does take a lot more alcohol to get it going. I have almost 3 tablespoons in this bottle. I'm going to put most of it in there. And I'll bring it over here so you can show you. You can see the alcohol is pooling in the center. That means it's at least that deep, which is a pretty good depth. If you don't put enough alcohol in this brand of stove, this type of stove, it won't bloom. It'll require a second charge. And this is self-priming, but you just have to put, 3 tablespoons or so roughly to get it to bloom. Shut the light off. And I'll show you the bloom and what it should look like. Light it up. I should have enough alcohol in here to make this bloom. On my last test it worked anyway. We'll find out. Now, as far as time to make this bloom, I did time it with my BlackBerry last time, and it took approximately a minute. You might be able to hear right now the alcohol boiling inside the stove. I can hear it. I'm not sure if my iPad is picking that up or not. And as you can see, it bloomed. So that was a pretty quick bloom. So there it is. I'm going to go ahead and turn a small light on. That's a little bit better. As you can see, some of them flames are kind of orangish coming out of there. I'm not sure if that's heat reduction or if that is still some sort of a residue burning out from the inside of the can, or if that is from the JB weld that I used to hold it together. I'm not 100% sure. But the reason why I did turn a small light on for is I wanted you to see that this design, of course, allows you to place a pan directly over top, and you get nice even coverage of flame. And I did actually boil some water with this last night. I cooked corn, actually, frozen corn, to go with the chicken breast that I made on my grill. And it worked wonderfully. Now, the burn time on this is less than the burn time on the Miller Lite can stove that I created earlier. At 3 tablespoons of alcohol, I got approximately 15 minutes of burn time, whereas the Miller Lite's can stove burnt for 23 minutes on the same amount of alcohol. So a little bit less, although this will boil water significantly faster. This boils the water, well, this boiled frozen corn in this exact same pot that I just put on the burner in about 3.5 minutes. That's quick, considering the corn was frozen. So there is a significant amount of heat that comes off of this style. So if you're looking for quick, this is pretty good. It's not the lightest, it's not the smallest, it's not the most compact, and it's not the easiest to make. If you don't have a sharp hacksaw blade or a lathe, or you're not fantastically steady with a Dremel tool to cut the can, it's not easy. I recommend wearing some gloves, or else you could get cut. I didn't this time, but it's possible. And one thing I wanted to try to do again on this, I used this sweet tea cup from McDonald's, just a plastic cup, to douse the flames on this yesterday, and it worked. I'm going to try it again. Worst case scenario, we'll have a meltdown. We'll try it again. Put it on there till the cup pops. Once it exhausts the available oxygen. Now, this time it didn't pop. And the cup is not hot. And the stove is out. I'll go ahead and turn the light back on. And there you have it. That is a Gunk brake parts cleaner can alcohol stove. Now, one thing to note about this will hold the heat a lot longer than a pop can stove. Probably a good 2 minutes longer than the average pop can stove. So be careful if you're going to try to handle this after the fact. Yeah, that is pretty hot. I'm going to get this, excuse my old dirty towel here. It's kind of used for cleanup. I'm going to bring this over here just so you can see that there is still some alcohol left in the stove. So it didn't completely exhaust it, but it does burn it faster, hence the lesser runtime. But I'm able to handle this now. It's not too hot anymore. Some notes real quick on this. First of all, the paint is not so easy to sand off of this as it is to sand off of a pop or beer can. Actually, I used a sanding sponge and I had a heck of a time. As you can see, from the jets up, it came off because it's been heated and sanded. From the jets down, all it does is scratch the paint. I'm sure you can get it off if you really worked at it. I didn't bother. As far as the charring on the inside, anybody that's ever used brake cleaner knows this stuff will take anything off. But as far as a residue, I don't know if it leaves a burning residue. I'm going to assume that's what this is. The JB Weld has held up well to the heat of this. Oh, there's a little alcohol spilling out of there now if I'm turning it upside down. You probably could enhance this design by placing a bead of insulation, fiberglass, or some carbon fiber felt, if you happen to have some of that, on the inside to hold the alcohol as a wick. Draining alcohol out of this really isn't that practical. If you do turn it upside down, shake it a little bit, the alcohol will run out, but not that much because it is sealed around the rim. If anything, it's going to come out of the jet holes like it did right here, making that wet. So you would definitely want to, unless you can have something in there as a wick, you definitely want to run this out of fuel when you use it, just to be on the safe side. You don't want to have this stuff spilling inside your bag or all over you, more specifically. The stuff gets on your skin, it really dries it out. So that's it. That is the Gunk brake parts cleaner alcohol stove. I'm going to keep making different designs. Questions or comments, I'm not an expert. I'm probably not the first person to make this particular style, but I did make one. So please leave me your questions or your comments. I'll be happy to try and answer any questions you might have. Have a good day, everybody.